folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris once again. Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports here on the Indaba Africa channel. It is Sunday, May 1st, 2022. May Day! Leftist hate wankers around the world are celebrating the day of labor, abusing businesses and entrepreneurs. That's one view on the world, but it is May Day, and I thought it'd be an apropos time to talk to one of our previous guests who's been on the program a few times, most recently when we were discussing the November elections and what happened there. This, of course, is Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, a co-founder of that organization, and still with the organization. We've talked Cape Secession. I think the first time we talked was nearly 2 years ago now. So I thought it'd be an apropos time to talk about this. We'll talk about the recent rally that took place in Cape Town and many other things. And we'll take your questions from the audience. That's a big part of today's discussion, is to take your questions from the audience. So with that, no further ado, Phil, how's it going? How are you today? It's exciting times in South Africa. I guess that's one way to put it. Well, yeah, you can ask the Ukrainians about that one. That's true. That's a very thin line. But, you know, I mean, honestly, I think the African National Congress has really done a great job the past... Oh, you're silent again. I got you on silent. Sorry, folks. I'm sorry, folks. My apologies. They couldn't hear you, Phil. You only said one line. So, the problem is I was doing rugby last night, and if I leave the desktop audio on, then the rugby stream comes in. I get a copyright strike, and my channel disappears. So, I use the same software switch. So, my apologies, folks. We got it. I see all the folks saying no. Phil was just saying, I said, exciting times in South Africa. If you can recall the line you just said about exciting and the line between something else, if you could do that again. Exciting times in South Africa.
Yeah. I think I said the line between excitement and terror is very fine.
Indeed it is. And my response was just ask the Ukrainians. But listen, I think that the African National Congress in the year and a half, nearly 2 years since we first spoke on this topic, it's going on 2 years now, they've really done a bang-up job of proving the idea that Cape Secession is a good idea. I mean, how much more could they screw up here besides the PPE theft, the pervasive misuse of funds, the constant disclosures of allegations, charges, corruption, all these things. And then the insurrection took place in July of last year, in which they showed the state was wholly incapable of anticipating something that lowly I in central Pennsylvania predicted was going to happen on June 29th. They failed to prepare for it. They failed to recognize it. Then they covered it up. They tried to trot out the usual suspects. The entire KZN province is utterly obliterated. Billions of rand, stores looted, destroyed, supply chains disrupted. And it's not just KZN. Durban is the port for Southern Africa. It's all the inroads to get to Zambia, to Botswana, to Mozambique. Everything comes in through the Zimbabwe. And then to top that off, meteorologists predict record rainfall, and they sit back and do nothing. They don't clean the storm drains out. And then a natural disaster is turned into a biblical crisis because the ANC. So, Phil, I would say that probably one of the biggest advocates for the Cape Secession movement would be the ANC these days.
Well, I think it's fair to say that they don't govern very well.
Okay. Maybe we'll leave it at that. Maybe I'm being a little over the top.
Look, you could take a whole show talking about the ANC and not thinking. I think sometimes minimalist is better in terms of that. They're pretty appalling as a government, and I think any objective measure would clarify that they aren't that good.
Okay, let's try to shift from the disaster or the dumpster fire known as the African National Congress. By the way, I've rebranded them. I don't know if you know that. Have you heard about this? Probably not. It probably doesn't get a lot of traction with all the shadow banning I get. Have you heard?
Tell me.
Okay, so I've rebranded the ANC. You know, they're talking about their national conference. We'll stop talking about the ANC in a moment, folks. But they have their national conference at the end of the year. They're having all the party conferences in the regional going on right now in Mpumalanga and KZN and so on, so forth. But excuse me. They'll have the national conference later this year, and they're talking about, the rebirth of the ANC. And I think these people are delusional. I mean, mental health officials are needed, but they are talking about. So I've decided it's time to rebrand. The ANC wasn't always ANC. It changed its name early in its history. It was founded in 1912, and it had a different name. It changed its name, and it's time to rebrand it. I've renamed it and rebranded #RAIN. RAIN stands for race hustling, arrogance, ineptitude, and negligence. And that's the African National Congress to a T. RAIN.
Well, here's something that might be interesting that maybe you do or you don't know. the ANC was founded out of something called or as a consequence of something called the Shriner Delegation or the Shriner Mission. Which was a multiracial delegation sent from the Cape to London at the time that South Africa was being formed to plead for non-racialism, to have a non-racial franchise in the new South Africa that was then to be formed, and the British didn't agree to that, and that actually gave birth to the ANC. So to a certain extent there would be a certain symmetry to Cape Independence returning to the end and delivering a non-racial franchise, breaking up the Union of South Africa and getting back to what we should have had all along. So that would be somewhat poetic.
Well, with English, the words can be a little tricky sometimes. People misspeak. They say success instead of secession, and saying succession. They get a little confused. But we're talking about Cape Secession. This would be the departure of the Cape from the Republic of South Africa. That's what we're really talking about. And I've talked to you and I've talked to others about the legalities of it. We've talked about examples of that are not apropos, or they're not one-for-one examples like Catalonia and other things. But I do want to talk about that a little bit more and give people a chance to get their questions in here. Sure. But let me just ask you, there was a rally that took place this past week, and Joe Emilio was there. He did bang up coverage of it. But other than Joe Emilio, I would not have known the event took place. And that's not throwing shade on you folks or Cape X or anyone else. The reason I say that is there was not just a dearth, but a total absence of reporting by any media outlets in South Africa. I couldn't find a single article on it happening, or the aftermath of it. So all I can see is the following. So let me frame it this way, and you can tell me what I got wrong because I wasn't there. It appears that it was a relatively small rally for whatever reason. I'd say probably 800 to 1,000 people. I don't know if that's true. That's why I'm asking you. And that the press didn't cover it. Does that hit it on the mark? And what was it all about?
Sure. So yeah, look. So we in terms of numbers, we didn't do a head count, but I would say it probably was a shade over 1,000, somewhere maybe around 1,200 if we had to put a guess, but certainly more than 1,000. And look, in terms of rallies, South Africa is not big on rallies, and neither is the government. So there's a limit put on numbers in any case. So actually, we were allowed a maximum of 2,000 rallies on the day. So in terms of political rallies for South Africa, that would be considered a fair size. So from that point of view, I think it was a success. One of the challenges that we have as a movement is that there is a certain amount of denial, and the mainstream media really doesn't like reporting on Cape Independence. There was a couple of journalists that were there. But ironically, we had a journalist from Japan's largest daily newspaper, but we didn't have a journalist from South Africa's largest daily newspaper.
Or any newspaper.
Yeah. Well, look, the Burger covered it. But ironically, they then somewhat ridiculously said 200 to 300 people there, which is just idiotic. I mean, you could just see the photos, and even the people that you can count, if you don't get to the end of the line, would be well past that. So that was sort of inaccurate reporting, but at least they covered it. And I think Netwerk 24, which is an Afrikaans relatively mainstream channel, they covered it. So there was some minor coverage, but as you say, the main titles ignored the press release that was sent out before, ignored the press release that was sent out after, didn't cover it. And in fact, even there was one journalist who then wrote an article the last couple of days for the Times, and it was a terrible article. Up to this point, we have submitted a right to reply, and even that hasn't been published. But this is a battle that we're new to. At the end of the day, it's understandable. From our point of view, understandable is perhaps the wrong word. When you're pushing something that is evocative, provocative, that upsets the status quo, then you struggle. And the mainstream media in South Africa is largely left leaning, this goes very much against their narratives. There are some papers who will never take anything we ever produce, and that's been the case from the start. And then there are other papers who will be very, very selective what we'll take, and certainly there's no desire for them to let South Africa know that that Cape Town was awash with Cape Independence supporters, and even less to let them know that those supporters were black, white, and coloured, and it was an extraordinary diverse rally, because all of the sort of the narrative that somehow Cape Independence is kind of some niche movement and is all about a white homeland wouldn't stand the scrutiny of the pictures. But that's fine. It's our job to get those images out there, and we will get those images out there. And that's fine. It would be much easier if the media played ball and did their job. But I mean, we know that the media is not there to report the news. They're there to shape the news, and that's the reality of the times we live in.
Well, in fact, you've hit kind of on a point there that we know the world over. The media seems to find its job is to craft and shape the news, not report the news. They disguise op-ed, opinion, and editorialism as news all the time. The Washington Post, we can just run through the whole list of them. But Die Burger, I think, is also owned by Naspers, isn't it? Or maybe I'm mistaken on that. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but look, I think the Afrikaans press, just because of its audience, is forced to be a little bit more engaging. But I mean, you can look. I mean, about a month ago, about 150 people turned up for the AFF to stand outside a wine farm owned by
Johan Rupert, wasn't it? Yeah, it was this wine farm.
And there were probably about 20 news channels there. But as you say, now sort of 1,200 people marched through Cape Town in a completely peaceful rally. Nothing's burnt, no litter, nothing smashed, no arrests. A festive atmosphere, and of course, that is not deemed to be newsworthy.
Well, a braai isn't newsworthy in South Africa, so I just share that with you. A peaceful gathering of people just relaxing and chilling is a braai. That's not newsworthy in South Africa. That happens every day at somebody's back patio. No, but I mean, look, you're absolutely right about this. I mean, I saw the build-up, the EFF talking about they're going to Johan Rupert, the white monopoly capitalist, who most of Rupert's vast fortune was built outside South Africa through the Richemont Group, of which I'm a shareholder, my very small shareholder, but that's where the money came from. So I wish Johan Rupert lots of success with Richemont and all his luxury brands like Moet and Cartier. Keep buying that, rich people, including corrupt ANC cadre. Keep buying that stuff with the money you've stolen. But I digress. So, the thing about this is that a lot of people confuse what's going on here. And I think if you're outside the Cape, maybe it's in the Western Cape, it may be it's understandable. I mean, you've got your group, the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, which is not a political party. We should make that clear. You've got Cape Exit, and you've got another movement out there. All three of them all trying to achieve the same sort of thing, I believe, and that's to get the Western Cape to secede from South Africa. Then you have the Cape Party, Jack Miller's party, which I think confuses people more. That's actually a political party that stands for office. So if you could lay out, to help our viewers who are unfamiliar with Cape Independence Advocacy Group, a little explanation of who you are and what it's all about, and maybe some differences, if there are any, between all of y'all.
Sure. Well, look. So of those parties, so effectively, let's take the context for the march as there. So the march was jointly organised by 4 organisations. So we marched together. So there's a degree of unity of purpose. So the CIAG, which is us, the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, we're a political lobby group, a pressure group, and we focus on the media, and we focus on influencing political parties and other organisations. So effectively, it's let's call it a high level strategic information driving organisation. Then you have a Cape Exit, who would be a community-based organisation. They're collecting mandates from the people. So where our constituency isn't really members, actually it's how much do we influence building up a political network. A lot of that behind the scenes for us to influence and to push the agenda of Cape Independence. Then Cape Exit are signing up members. They're dealing with members of the public and asking them to sign up to that they would vote leave in a referendum if one took place. And then you've got the 2 political parties there, the Cape Independence Party, who were previously the Cape Party, and the Freedom Front Plus. So there was 2 political parties there, a civic organisation and a political lobby group. So that's the 4 of us that were there. There are other organisations that also push this, but are less involved with us. But typically, the 4 of us, whilst we might have individual differences on particular aspects, largely work together to do this, and we often give the example of saying, look, if you're going to build a house, you don't need 4 builders or 4 carpenters. So actually, this political pressure group plus a community organisation plus 2 political parties it covers the sort of the full range of required organisations, if you like, to push Cape independence forward.
So a variety of organizations working towards this. I think it's important for people to understand that, because people confuse the Cape Party, which is now, as you mentioned, the Cape Independence Party, under Jack Miller, which actually stands for office. Now, that's a regional party that has no focus outside the Western Cape, whereas the Freedom Front Plus is a national party, which, in fact, was the only significant party to have any gain in this last municipal elections last November. We talked about that previously. They had a tremendous surge in people sitting on councils, as well as the number of share of votes they got, whereas everyone else cratered. We saw the DA lose 37% of its vote over 2016, the ANC lose 32% of its vote over 2016, and the Inkatha Freedom Party, which everyone's heralding, gain 1%, which wasn't a significant gain. The real reason they did so well in KwaZulu-Natal is because the ANC evaporated in KwaZulu-Natal with good reason. And so we saw the EFF even lose 2% of its votes. So the only party really gained was Freedom Front Plus national level, but that's a national. So it is an interesting concept, and I'll be talking to Dr. Peter Groenewald again very soon on the program. That's scheduled. We're just locking down the date right now. And it's interesting to see a national party that's Party South Africa advocate for and be in favor of Cape secession. That's a very interesting, and we've known that for some time. They came out last year and said they were in favor of that. I think it was last year. But it is an interesting dynamic. It makes sense for the Cape Independence Party. I mean, that's sort of the name of the party now. Sure. They want Cape independence. But the sentiment on the street in the Cape. Now, of course, it also comes down to, I should say this, Phil, when I talk to people, they're always asking, you talk about Cape independence, but what about the Northern Cape? What about the Eastern Cape? Is it just the Western Cape? And you and I have talked about this before, but I think it's a reasonable time. It's been a period of time past to ask once again, when we talk about Cape secession and Cape independence, are we just talking about the Western Cape province, or anyone that was a historic Cape, or anyone that wants to join? Where does that sentiment lie with your group, at least?
So look, we're pragmatists, and I think we have to take a pragmatic approach. You have to work out what the legal framework is, both domestically and in international law, and you have to work according to that, and then develop a strategy. So effectively, the starting point is the Western Cape. So at this point in time, we're pushing for independence of the Western Cape. And that is because of South Africa's 9 provinces, the Western Cape is the only one that historically, well, it's never given the ANC a majority ever since 1994, and it's the only province that isn't governed by the ANC. So it's very easy to point out that the Western Cape doesn't really have functional democracy. In other words, it never gets governed by who it votes for. It can't elect the government. It can't remove the government. We don't have a democracy. More than that, in terms of international language, we don't have the right to self-determination, which is a recognised human right. We can't determine how we're governed. We can't determine by whom we're governed. We can't determine by which policy we're governed. Once you start to move beyond that, it becomes difficult, because the Northern Cape and the Eastern Cape, which are both very big geographical territories, are governed by the ANC. So therefore, it starts to cloud the issue. But within those territories, so particularly within the southern half of the Northern Cape, and then the most westerly portion of the Eastern Cape, both of those regions also habitually don't vote ANC, and would very likely prefer to be part of an independent Western Cape or an independent Cape in the event that it happens. So the process would effectively be as follows: we will push for a referendum in the Western Cape, and we've got one agreed already. So the DA have agreed to include to call a referendum and include a question on Cape independence. So, and when that referendum, it will purely be in the Western Cape, and then, but a referendum under South African law is not binding. So therefore, that effectively would be a mandate. So let's say we go to have that referendum and we win the referendum. We've now got the Western Cape has voted to leave South Africa and to form its own country, and the negotiations are going to begin. And just as we saw in Brexit, that's going to be a timely negotiation. There's going to be an awful lot of things to sort out between the Western Cape government and the national government. And I think at that point in time, that is when the discussion about, well, what about these other communities along the borders, let's say, and our view is that there then should be secondary referendums at municipal levels, which then allows the territories along the border to decide who they want to. And perhaps there may be some regions within the Western Cape who say, well, look, we'd rather be part of South Africa. So I think we then say, look, the final border should be defined democratically. In other words, to let people decide which side of that border. Once we decide there's going to be a border and there's going to be a split, then let people democratically decide where that border's formed, and I think that's a very fair system. And so we start off with the Western Cape, but in all likelihood that border would be bigger than the Western Cape, and would include the parts of the Northern Cape and the Eastern Cape with it, but certainly not all of those two provinces.
All right, that's a very helpful explanation. Thank you for that. And I think the bottom line here is you have to be practical. Like you said, the ANC it rules in both those provinces, particularly in the Eastern Cape, where they have massive support from the Xhosa community and others. For whatever reasons, they still have that. I don't understand why, but they do. It's beyond my understanding. But let me take a few things in here from the chat very quickly. Tim Fronimos, who's in Michigan, says, I have my Cape passport on my desk at the bank. Quite a conversation piece, to say the least. Okay, interesting there. And then the Pet Zoo film crew, who I haven't seen in donkey years, where have you been hiding, says he's busy editing the Cape Independence Advocacy Group's Freedom March video. It's going to be hot. Okay, well, Pet Zoo film crew, we've been talking about my arrival in Cape Town for making documentaries, and the plan is August, September. I expect to be there in that time frame. The Sevens World Cup is at Greenpoint in September, so I expect to be in the Western Cape in late August, early September, and I'll be going to Northern Cape, linking up with Vian Dutoy and some others for some visits there, and many other places, including Gauteng. It's just there's not going to be enough days, enough time to get around. But anyway, so just to let you know, Pet Zoo film crew, we've talked about collaborating, and it's time to get your camera ready. Okay, so all right, and there's let me see. There's something else here. Oh, here's a question from Erica. Where it just disappeared on me. My software is not friendly. There we go. Is there any chance the different Cape Independence Advocacy groups uniting as one, or are they working cross purposes? Before I give Phil a chance to weigh in on that, I've interviewed all three of the major groups that are involved in this, and there's a little bit of hiving off of one another. There's a little bit of independence in another. I'm not going to get into personalities. I know that in the past that may have been an issue with some things, but I will say that by and large, what I see externally, and I'll give Phil a chance to answer this question, I'll reframe it this way. These groups appear to be working towards the same goal and cooperating more frequently than people think that, or realize they are. And so that's kind of the question. How's it going? Are you working with other groups, or do people go off in their own direction? Now, you mentioned the two political parties, of course, but what about the other groups there, Phil?
Yeah. So look, within that group of four, so again, the CIAG, Cape Exit, the Cape Independence Party, and the Freedom Front Plus. Then we work with a high degree of unity of purpose. In other words, we meet on a regular basis, at least once a month, sometimes more than that, to discuss strategy, discuss what we're doing, and to from time to time we issue joint statements, and for example, this March we did jointly. So that's fair, and it's difficult. I don't think we'll ever merge, but because I think we've got some fundamental differences, and we've got different roles to fulfil. So for argument's sake, we can't be a political lobby group talking to all political parties if we're actually linked to a political party. Either we're neutral or we're a political party, but we can't be both. But I think there's definitely some mileage. I think the independence movement is coming of age now. I think we've done phenomenally well, and I think our view, and let's talk personally, then it's easier. Then I haven't got to worry about speaking out of turn for anybody else. Speaking personally, I've always taken the view in the early days and up till now that the Cape Independence movement is a chariot, and actually it's got lots of horses pulling it, and as long as those horses are all running in roughly the same direction, where the chariot's moving forward at speed in the right direction. And therefore, even if I've had might have had some minor differences around process mainly. I think that's probably the biggest difference between the groups in terms of how they think Cape Independence will actually be delivered. Then I've never really worried, because up until now it hasn't really mattered who's right or who's wrong, and actually all of us still at that point, if it turns out that our plan is fatally flawed and somebody else's plan works, it's absolutely fine by me, and I think it's fine for everybody else. But I think we're starting to move beyond that now. I think we're starting to move into another phase of Cape Independence, where we. Where we're at the top table. We've and I don't think people understand just how involved we are in the political establishment. I think people see Cape Independence as really a fringe movement, but as a lobby group, and without giving any confidences, we're really involved with the political establishment, and they take Cape Independence and the movement very seriously. I do think we probably, as we come nearer to the goals, then all of a sudden process starts to become more important. And actually, at the start, it didn't really matter what the process was. But I think as we start to get to a certain level of critical mass, then it starts to become more important. And I think that's the space that we're moving into. Certainly as we speak, we are we're always meeting with the different groups, and we're planning probably in the next month that those 4 groups will get together again, and we'll have a strategy in Indaba. That'll be our second one for the year. And from a personal perspective, I would like to see a narrowing of those options. I would like to see a common strategy emerge, even if that strategy might have different components, a political component and a civic component, and so on. I would like to start addressing some of those process issues. But I mean, you can only move as fast as you can in terms of that. The key thing is getting public support. But I think Cape Independence has done very well, but I don't think it's done well enough yet to guarantee success, and therefore I think we probably all are going to have to swallow little aspects of our pride and accept that the different organisations can all do different things with varying degree of skills and have contacts and so on, and I think we need to pull that together and develop a strategy, and I hope we'll be able to do that, but I can't promise it.
Well, I should disclose, an interesting full disclosure to the audience here. I too have participated in that forum that you've discussed there. I used to habitually attend it every month. But I have not for the past several months with the scheduling conflict. But that scheduling conflict has been resolved now, so I'm going to reach out to the organizer and try to rejoin that group if I'm still welcome there. But I think most of you, probably none of you actually know that I actually participate in those events. That just shows you that, see, I can't keep secrets. In case you're wondering about that. But we just had a super chat from Citizen Guardian. And he just put up 3 bronze stars. So he just, I guess, 70 rand. Thank you for the super chat there, Citizen Guardian. It was a stripper chat. There was no question or comment with it. But there is a question here from Robot Trucker for you, Phil. He says, how can he, as a non-resident of the Western Cape, support independence for the Cape? I think it's a good question. I think there's there's some sentiment around the country, and certainly with expats who would like to see the Western Cape on its own. Is there something people outside the Cape can do?
Sure. Look, at this point, whether you're inside the Cape or outside the Cape, at this point in time is completely irrelevant. Yeah, everybody can help the same. The only thing that you can't do if you're based outside of the Western Cape is vote in the referendum, because the referendum will be based on the electoral roll of people based in the Western Cape. But at this point, we haven't got a referendum. We haven't got a date for the referendum, so therefore that is not on the agenda. So. Let's turn that. What can people do? And let's look at the biggest challenges for Cape Independence, and that's how you can. That's how most people can help. One of the real big things that we suffer with. So if people often say, what about the ANC and what about and they think that is the biggest obstacle to Cape Independence, but it's not. The biggest obstacle to Cape Independence is people's apathy and people's disbelief. So you end up in a scenario where people who would love to see Cape Independence happen actually just don't do anything to make it happen because they say, it'll never happen, and they give up without trying, without realizing that they are now risking themselves. They don't realize that they're the cause of that, and all of these movements start with people. So I think that is the biggest thing. We have to create noise. We have to create awareness around Cape Independence, and we have to stand up and say, I want this. And we mustn't allow the mainstream media, which we touched on earlier, to sort of bully people into silence. Because if you look at the articles, and the article we responded today, for argument's sake, was one in Times Live by Tom Eaton. Who basically just it called us. I can't remember the exact choice of words, but fantasists, I think was the word. And I think this is that, and that's the notion that's being sold to people, particularly by the mainstream media. And then a lot of people are actually allowing themselves to buy into that. I wish, and one day I've always said, when I retire, I'm not interested in politics. People say, what will you do when you retire? So I'll write a book, and when you read back the book and you realise what was actually happening behind the scenes, you'll realise how close we actually are to Cape Independence, because we're close. We're really close. And our biggest obstacle is not the ANC, and it's not the Constitution, it's not the DA. It's actually that people who want it just don't say it. And so therefore, what can you do as an individual? You can you can talk to everybody. You can write to newspapers. You can write to the letters. You can get onto social media. You can tell your family and friends. You can bring up the conversation at Bright. Get people talking about Cape Independence and actually let them know it's okay to support Cape Independence so that they aren't bullied into silence. So that's the one thing. And then those people who are in a financial position to be able to help, then support one of the Cape Independence groups and help us financially so that we can do the same thing. Because that is the biggest issue. It's awareness and allowing people to, and I think South Africans have been browbeaten during this period of time and forced into a narrative, and it's really, really unhealthy. We have this African nationalistic narrative where people are just bullied into silence, and the stupid thing is that communities, and I don't want this to in any way have a racial connotation, that's not my intention, but whole communities are cowed into silence through absolutely nothing but their own fear. And people have to stand up for the sort of South Africa they want. That if Cape Independence is the solution, and we definitely think it is, then people must stand up and they must be counted, and they must let people know they support Cape Independence. Give people something to follow. I think, if you've seen that TED talk or whatever it is, where they talk about how to build a movement, but there's a brilliant video, and they say, who's the most important person? It's not the person who starts the movement, it's the first follower. The first follower is the really important person in the movement, because it allows other people to join in. It stops them feeling they're foolish, and that's what we do. And if you've got specific skills, reach out to us, info@capeindependence.org. If you're a marketing guy, if you can do social media, if you can write for newspapers, contact us. Come and join us as a volunteer. Bring whatever skill set you've got, and we'll use that skill set. We're an organisation of volunteers. People think that we've become this organisation that's well known, but it's an organisation that started with 4 ordinary people, with nothing other than a passion for Cape Independence. And it's not the case now, but when the CIAG was formed, 3 of the 4 people who formed the CIAG weren't based in the Western Cape. I was the only one that was based in the Western Cape. They were also outside of the Western Cape, but actually they had an affinity for the movement. Obviously, over time that's changed. So you can do lots.
Well, Robot Trucker says I read his question wrong, but I don't understand what I'm supposed to have gotten from it. You wrote it, and the only thing that I inferred in there was you put an apostrophe N. I assume that meant non-resident, or is it short for effing resident? I have no idea what that meant, but so you'll have to be clear there, folks. I can't get inside your cranium and figure out what your intent is. You only have 200 characters there, but Acidzil makes a point. But look, Phil, a couple things about this, and I'm going to go to Acidzil's point in a second, but really I think what you just described there is another acronym. I was in the Army for 36 years, so we're fond of acronyms. I'm not, but the Army is. So we're going to have to, we got RAIN for rebranding the ANC, but I think we're talking about in the Western Cape is it's a fad. I got to do a salute real quick. There's 11 months for Janssen van Rensburg's membership. Okay, as soon as the zombie goes, I take it down. It's a chance to get a screen capture. So it's a fad is really what it is. Fear, apathy, and disbelief. That's why people don't congregate and don't take steps to do something for Cape Independence. Fad. It's a fad. They see it as a fad. Fear, apathy, and disbelief. But let me put this in sharp focus here about how things can change so very, very quickly. In 1989, as the year began, no one in their wildest imaginations ever thought the Berlin Wall would collapse. No one. Show me an analyst that said that it was time for the Berlin Wall. There won't be a single one. Not even me. I was a young man. I sure didn't predict it. And look how quickly it fell, just because some Germans in the middle part of Germany, falsely called East Germany, by the way, in the middle part of Germany, went on holiday to Hungary and slipped across the border to Austria. And for once, the Austrians said, you know what, we're not going to stop them. And thousands flooded out. And the whole thing came tumbling down because of that. That's what started. The Arab Spring was started by 2 events, because a Tunisian university graduate did self-immolation in Sfax, and that was followed up very quickly by the leaks of U.S. State Department cables in which it was revealed that State Department officials knew that the Ben Ali family had been ingratiating themselves and been corrupt and giving themselves favors for years. And once the Tunisian public heard that from a trusted source, American diplomats, the country went up in flames. So it takes very little. George Herbert Walker Bush had a 91% approval rating in March of 1991. 91%. No president's ever had 91% approval. That's after the Gulf War, right after the Gulf War. Now, I didn't get to take advantage of it. I was sitting in the desert in Iraq, so I wasn't getting to see that 91%. But he had a 91% approval rating. He got 38% of the electorate's vote in November of 92, a little over a year later, 91 to 38. They're not direct correlations because people who poll aren't all voters, but you see there's a huge disconnect there. And if you stick around after this is over, folks, come back and look for my video that I released about Cyril Ramaphosa being ushered out of the Royal Bafokeng Stadium a couple hours ago. I've done a video on it already, and you'll see clips of Nicolae Ceausescu addressing the socialist proletariat. And did someone shoot? What's going on? They're going in the building. Things can change very quickly, and I'll tell you what, the current ANC government doesn't have a handle on the security services, on law enforcement, on the rule of law, and it doesn't take much, it doesn't take many to change things irrevocably. So with that in mind, that's a less than peaceful route I'm talking about there, but the peaceful route was with George Bush with the election. The same thing can, in fact, happen in the Western Cape. Acid Zill asked this question. That's why I framed it that way, Phil. He said, yes, but how much longer must we wait? It's been 2 years and nothing has really happened. Well, it's been 2 years almost 2 years since Phil and I spoke, but this movement has been going on for several years prior to that. And how long do we have to wait? Well, I think the answer here is, will the referendum take place? The Democratic Alliance, which rules the Western Cape, promised a referendum. They didn't deliver. They're promising again. So where are we at there, Phil? How much longer must we wait? 2 years? 2,000 years?
Yeah. Look, I think I understand the frustration. We get asked this an awful lot, and we get people's frustration. First and foremost, I would turn it around and say, well, it's not up to us. In many ways, it's up to you. We don't have a magic wand that delivers Cape independence. We channel the support of the people of the Western Cape, and it comes back to the same question. If people get out there, if 50,000 people had turned up last week rather than 1,000, our job would have been made easier. And I was chatting to Des today and laughing. People say, if I'd known it was going to be so successful, I really wished I'd been there. It's kind of, well, we really wished you'd been there too. And actually, it's no good wishing for it after the fact. Do you not realise that you're actually harming the movement by not standing up when you're called? It's not a picnic that you come and, oh, well, that looked like it was fun. It actually has got purpose, and we're just ordinary people. We can only channel what's happening. So therefore, it comes to the people, and at this point in time, not enough people are working hard enough to make Cape independence a reality. And I get it that I'm probably preaching to the converted here. The people that are here listening are not going to be the people, but that's the reality. That's where we've got to get people on there. But to say not a lot's happening is definitely not the case. And I can only talk of our own organisation. We are constantly engaged with political parties, and in the 2 years that we've been involved, we've had the Freedom Front have come out and got really involved in this movement. We've had a relatively successful local government elections, albeit that the Cape Independence Party didn't have the greatest, but the other parties supporting Cape Independence did really well. We have got agreement on the referendum legislation. We're waiting for that to go through Parliament. We've got a few other things that we're working on in the background, which aren't in the public knowledge. But we've gone from this being an obscure idea that nobody had any interest in to something that the party of provincial government has come out and said, well, we are willing to allow the people of the Western Cape to decide this democratically for themselves, and we're going to fix the legislation that's needed for that to happen. And they've announced the legislation, published it in the Government Gazette, called for comments through Parliament. They haven't done the next step yet, which is actually table it in Parliament, and we have a meeting shortly with the DA to push on that. And at this point in time, I don't know what stalled it, so I can speculate, but maybe I shouldn't. But to say nothing has happened is definitely not the case. I think it's been an interesting space since the local government elections, and I think there's been a bit of I think it's taken a bit of time for people for politics to resettle. I think there was a certain amount of excitement after the local government elections, where people suddenly had this sort of fanciful notion that the ANC are finally going to be under 50% and all of our problems are solved and we don't need Cape independence anymore. And certainly some of the parties and the DA are very guilty of that. Focusing on the national elections that are coming up, and it's taken a little bit of time for the reality to sink in that coalition governments aren't all that, and they aren't going to be some magical solution. And we've seen things like the Patriotic Alliance announcing this week that because somebody called them a name they didn't like, they're going to pull out of all the coalitions in the Western Cape. And this is the nonsensical stuff that we're dealing with. And I think the penny on that is finally starting to drop. But So how long is it going to take? It's going to take as long as it takes. Nobody wants it quicker than me. I think in terms of the referendum legislation, ask me again in a month when we've spoken to the DA. We've got a meeting booked, and one of the top item on the agenda is when are you going to table the referendum legislation? Clearly that's a key part in the process. But the referendum legislation itself is not the be all and the end all, because if we had a referendum tomorrow, last time we polled, 46% was the support amongst voters. 46% is a lot, but it's a loss. We still have to keep building this movement. We still have to keep driving this, and that's where I can say it 100 times over. That's where it comes down to ordinary people getting up there and getting behind this movement and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And not, I obviously giving the responsibility on supporters. That responsibility also lies with us in the movement, and we're going to have our strategy session, and that's clearly one of the things that I also want to bring up amongst our partners and say, look, we also have to find an easier way for people to buy into this, we've certainly got some ideas for that, and I think we haven't got forever to fix this thing. Fortunately, what we do have is a disintegrating state, which will make Cape Independence easier and easier to deliver. But we've got to do our part. Supporters and organisations like ourselves, realistically, it depends. I always said 18 months from to the referendum, but actually the last 6 months the DA have dragged their heels. So realistically, are we still 12 months away? I don't know. I don't know. I want it to be as quick as possible. I really hope that a referendum will take place before 2024. Actually, there's been talk then that's saying, well, look, we're probably getting so close to that perhaps the referendum could take place at the same time as 2024. I don't know. Let's not speculate unduly on that.
Well, there's a lot of questions coming in left and right here that we really need to get to. So let me try to get some of those. I'll answer some of those, and I'll direct some of those your way, and that sort of thing. So Gerrit Janssen van Rensburg, when she did she renewed her membership there, she said, I believe Cape Independence will happen sooner if the Zulu Kingdom also starts pushing for independence. Well, in fact, that's an argument that many of us have been taking for a long time. It's quite a natural breakaway, the Zulu Kingdom there. And, they own 2.8 million hectares of land, the kingdom does, and they have a constituency there of nearly 10 million just in KwaZulu-Natal who are Zulu. So it's also a viable one from an economic perspective and a geographical perspective. So, if in fact Western Cape secession does happen, some people said the next to go will be the Zulu Republic. That'll be the next to go. I'm not sure what the case will be. The death of Goodwill Zwelithini has certainly had an impact on the future of that. The new king his coronation was delayed, and he's getting, plus there's opposition to him. So that's the Zulu kingdom is not quite settled, and what happens there is, but it is a fair point there, Gerrit Janssen van Rensburg. Appreciate that. Arctic, who's a pilot, says, are the financials of Cape Exit and other groups published to their members? In other words, is there transparency about funds? I think you and I might have talked about this briefly, and if I'm wrong, correct me on the spot. I think, as I recall, that you guys were self-funded. You weren't getting money from outside. I may be wrong. It's also been almost 2 years since we had this conversation. But Cape Exit is not your group. That's a different group. So I don't know if you can speak for them. Sure.
No, look. So we but I think both of us we're a not-for-profit company. We are registered and we publish our financials on the CIPC. I think we're too small for those to be made public, but I'm not sure. But anyway, we publish those. Obviously, we certainly don't publish names of individual donors and so on. But we run these operations on very limited budgets, and that's a harsh reality of the situation. We would love to have more, but it's not difficult. It's quite difficult to get funding. Obviously, we have no access to government funds at all, and in general, the sort of normal institutions who fund not for profits are not keen to fund secession organisations. So it's a challenge, but actually, here we are, and we poll and we march and we find our ways of doing stuff, and people do fund us, and there's some acts of extraordinary generosity, and I'm not going to name people, but I can think of one recently where somebody who would be of relatively limited means gave us what for them would have been an absolutely huge amount of money, and funded a large portion of the march, that acts like that are just quite extraordinary and humbling. And if the person's watching, then they knew who they are. I've said thank you in person, but I often thought of the Bible story of the widow's mite, and it wasn't a mite they gave; it was a lot more than that. But knowing the person personally, I understood that that it was a vast sum of money, and flip, it was humbling.
It is when people do that and they give. That's why a lot of people always want to contribute to my channel, and a lot of them are not in the best financial situations owing to the lockdown and closing business, stuff like that. I'm like, if you can't, don't. Just be present. That counts. If you can do that. If you've got the resources and you can afford it, then help folks out. But if you don't put yourself at risk and put yourself in a bind if you don't have the resources. But I got to share. You and I don't think I've ever talked about this, Phil. After your first appearance on my program a couple years ago when my original channel was blowing up and, before YouTube decided to come after me, you came on the channel and the Flying Monkey Sphere on Twitter went bat crap crazy. They attacked my channel and accused me of being a fake South African and Brit, claiming to be a South African when I'm clearly not a South African. And they put my image up and they talked about my channel, but then they did like 5 seconds of you chatting. And I'm like, okay, hang on a second here. I've never been a Brit. I've never claimed to be a Brit. I sure don't sound like a Brit unless you're drunk. And I'm an American. I'm nothing but. But apparently it was meant to be an attack on you, but they attacked my channel because they're lazy, hate-wanking leftists. That's why. But I don't know if you knew that story, but I came under, and then the Flying Monkey Spear. I say flying monkeys. That's a reference to the Wizard of Oz, where the Wicked Witch has the flying monkeys that come along and attack everybody. So the Flying Monkey Sphere came after me because you were on the channel a couple years ago. So not everybody likes Cape Exit. I'll just let you know that there are some people that are not fans of it, but I think they're just Twitter trolls, to be honest.
We always laugh, and I've had a few experiences, but the funniest one was when I was debating on SAFM. And I was debating the EFF, and their spokesperson for the Western Cape accused me of being an agent of the Queen of England. Yeah, but I mean, they're just morons. We know they're morons. So, you can only laugh.
You can only laugh. There's a conservative commentator here in the States named David Webb. He's a burly guy. He's black. He's got a deep voice like this. And David Webb is a very well-known conservative. One of these up and rising little, mildly attractive. That's all it takes on the left is be mildly attractive, and that gets your attention. Or be hideously ugly. That also seems to work for them. But mildly attractive leftist decided she was going to get traction. She's black. So she comes on his radio program. She calls in to talk about a serious topic. This a couple years ago. I was actually listening on my way to work. And she starts castigating him going, well, you don't know what you're talking about because you're white male privilege. And he's like, excuse me, I don't know if you know this, but I'm African American. They're so easy to destroy because they're really dumb, most of them. There are some bright ones, and they're the dangerous ones. But let me get back to the comments here. So Robot Trucker said he made a funny mistake because used A and N and an Afrikaans equivalent. The Robot Trucker is a resident of the Western Cape, but it turns out very well that I misunderstood your question because it gave Phil a chance to tell how people everywhere can help with this. So that was excellent. Whether it was your intent or not, it came out well. Tim Fronemus once again says he's telling Hart that he's been saying since the 90s that the Zulus should be independent and an ally of the Cape. Well, fair enough there. And then Debbie, this is a funny one, Phil. Debbie Morey says, now, when I started my channel, I was accused of talking way too fast. I had a lot of Afrikaans first language speakers who couldn't keep up. But Debbie's saying, I can type 100 words per minute. I wonder what words per minute Phil is getting in.
Yeah, guilty as charged.
Well, that's two of us, man. I've slowed my cadence down a lot, but I am okay. All right, so U.S. Born My Renee, here's in the U.S. now, says, should they pull this off, how do they plan on handling the influx of people that will want to move there from other parts of South Africa? Hell, forget that. What about the influx of people who want to move there fleeing from Canada and Australia? What about all the Afrikaners and the South Africans who want to flee from the penal colony of Australia and come back to the Western Cape? But seriously, serious question. We all know there's been mass in-migration from the Eastern Cape, especially overpopulated. I mean, you look at the size of the Cape Flats, it is like 10 times the population it was 30 years ago. So you're going to have border posts up? What's the plan? I mean, are people prepared for the influx of folks from other parts of the country?
Sure. Look, so The difficulty with this question is not the question itself; it's the sort of the racial undertones that go with it that make it a difficult question. So first and foremost, any sovereign state has to protect its borders. Yeah, that's the reality, and we've seen what happens if you don't protect
Phil,
your
I
borders.
have to correct you. According to the Manchurian Cadaver, not only do we not have to protect our borders in America, but we take undocumented criminal alien invaders, put them on planes, and fly them in the dead of night to Harrisburg, Albany, and Tallahassee. So I think you're wrong about that. Joe Biden tells me different. Anyway.
So clearly we're going to have to control the uncontrolled migration. But let's make this, and I think we have to find a way of making this a fair system. And I think let's sort of go back one step and say, what have we got in South Africa? We've basically got two territories: the Western Cape and the rest of the country, or the Western Cape plus a few bits around it. And in the rest of the country, there is a prevailing ideology. The ideology is largely African nationalist, and it is leans towards socialism. And in the Western Cape, you have a much more diverse population. They're opposed to race-based legislation, and they lean much more towards a free market. The Western Cape's economy trades predominantly with the West. South Africa trades predominantly with China and the East. So we have this complete difference of thing. So effectively, what we want to end up at the end of this situation is two regions where the people living in both can be live and be managed according to the democratic will of the majority. So that's where we're calling a split. Now that is going to leave us in a situation where there are people who are in South Africa who actually identify more with the Western Cape, and perhaps some people in the Western Cape who identify more easily with South Africa. And I think so there has to be some system for people to kind of sort themselves out in terms of that afterwards. Anybody who lives in the Western Cape, and let me be clear that we're pushing for Cape independence for all of the people of the Western Cape. So if you live in the Western Cape, then you have the option of citizenship, and this is for everybody. Nobody is going to be repatriated or so on. But I think what we're talking about is, what about the people that want to come in? Now, the Western Cape is relatively sparsely populated. There's no shortage of space. There's shortage of work and resources, but that's largely a function of the national government policies that we've got at the moment. And so I'm just going to rephrase that. And people say, look, migration is the issue. And I'm going to tell you that I don't think migration is the issue in the Western Cape. I think law and order is the issue. And therefore, if we have a situation where we create an independent Western Cape and somebody wants to move from the rest of South Africa, has genuine reasons for wanting to come to the Western Cape and can contribute in some way to the economy with skills or with capital, with starting a business, then actually much it is with any other country in the world, those people will be welcome and we'll want them to come. What we don't want is for people to come illegally, and I think that's and if we've got an issue at the moment in terms of migration, it's not the migration. Now, I've always said the same thing. I'm an immigrant to the Western Cape. I'm not from the Western Cape, so it would be extraordinarily hypocritical of me to say that people shouldn't be coming, say, from the Eastern Cape to the Western Cape. I think if somebody wants to up sticks and move to another part of the world or the country to improve their lives, then actually those people have got some chutzpah. They're the people that we want. We want people to get up and make stuff happen. I think the difference is people mustn't be allowed to come to the Western Cape, settle themselves down on somebody else's front lawn, build themselves a house, break all of the laws. There has to be some system that's done for that. So and we'll have to negotiate what that is, but I suspect we'll just follow. I once did some research on the G20. And you're pretty much amongst the G20, immigration policies were consistent. So I think there'll be lots of ways for people to come legally into the Western Cape, and actually we will encourage skilled migration or people who can contribute to the economy. But obviously there'll be controls on unskilled or uncontrolled rather migration. But I think it can be a win-win, and there's plenty of opportunity in the Western Cape for all. And I don't think people need to fear that they're going to be locked out. I think actually what we do need to do is impose law and order, and we have to be in a society where law and order reigns, and if we do that, then migration won't be an issue.
Yeah, people frequently mischaracterize migration, immigration. For instance, a lot of people act as if America is anti-immigrant, which is the furthest thing from reality. They say that Trump was anti-immigrant. That's the furthest thing from reality. We want law and order and reasonable. You can't just take in a billion people. You have to take in at a certain rate. So I think very few people know the United States naturalizes as citizens. In other words, we welcome onto our team, and we hand them one of these every year to 700 to 900,000 foreign nationals become American citizens every single year. There isn't a country on the planet that comes remotely close to that figure. So it's possible. Now we would dwarf the Western Cape would be dwarfed geographically and population-wise compared to the United States, 6-8 million versus 330 million. But the point is, it's the same here. So let me bring some more stuff in for the chat. Before I do that, let me get Brett gave a $10 super chat. Thank you for that, Brett. Appreciate that. Before I get away from it, because on a previous stream, Brett gave a super chat and I didn't get to it, so I don't want to forget this. Brett said, if the Western Cape succeeds, how will their trade and diplomatic relationships be? Now, before Phil answers this question, a lot of these are hypothetical questions. Phil is giving you possible ways. Phil is not the government of the Independent Cape, and he may or may not be part of it. I suspect he might not want to be part of it, just leading a movement. But whatever the case is, these are hypotheticals, and they could go lots of directions. And I mentioned that because, Brett, we're going to answer your question. Then John Jarvis has made some valid points, which we're going to address as well. But Brett says, if the Cape succeeds, how will their trade and diplomatic relations be, specifically with South Africa and Namibia, and also with Botswana and Zimbabwe? And before Phil answers, I'll tell you that much ado was made about nothing when it came to Brexit, in my view. Oh my gosh, we have no trade agreement. You do. You revert to the trade agreement that was in effect prior to joining the European Union. I know that's or the European Coal and Steel Committee, which it was back then. So you go back to those standings. And like, what does the UK do with the US? Does export stop? No, you don't. You go back to what your relations were prior to that. In the case of the Cape, it's not a prior. So what you probably do is you have a status quo. You don't impose tariffs or that sort of thing. We will see what would happen, but that would be the smart approach for it. And as Phil alluded to, the Western Cape, much of its trade is with Europe and North America, the West, not with the rest of Africa, whereas much of the rest of the country is either into the region or to the east. So, Phil, what would the relations be like?
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting. So I think so I'm not an expert on trade. So first of all, I must say that. I think, broadly speaking, South Africa is an overly regulated economy. So, and most people in the Western Cape want a less regulated economy. Now, how less regulated is up to debate. There are plenty of economists who say, look, let's just create a free trade zone and have no tariffs for anything and make what you can make and buy what you can buy. And that may or may not be practical. Obviously, we're going to have to build a country, but I think certainly it's going to be less regulated than the rest of South Africa. In terms of trading, I would imagine that South Africa would be a major trading partner to the Western Cape. It's highly unlikely that that's going to stop unless there's some really ugly divorce, which really would be mutually assured destruction for both parties. We're going to continue trading across the border with South Africa and all of Southern Africa. So I think in terms of our existing trading relationships will continue and improve. And then beyond that, I suspect there's a phenomenal opportunity to trade into the rest of Africa. People who we've got to remember just how bureaucratically burdensome South Africa is, and I don't know what percentage of your listeners are based in South Africa and what are based overseas. Those who are based in
about 2/3 of South Africa these days.
Okay, all right. So then they'll have a good understanding of the level of bureaucracy. So a Western Cape that suddenly is freed up from all of these BEE and affirmative action and all of the transformation policies and so on and so forth, is suddenly a much lighter, meaner machine. And South Africa's we've already got Cape Town as a port. We've got Saldanha. We've got Mossel Bay. So Cape Town has got 3 ports already. We've got major routes up into Namibia and beyond. So it's entirely possible that the Western Cape can become a trading nation and much promised gateway into Africa. I think that the opportunities are absolutely immense for the Western Cape. It's not an exact comparison, but I mean, let's look at Singapore, which was had some similarities. It's located on a major trade route. It didn't have Western Cape has got far more natural resources than Singapore, and is a much bigger territory. But I mean, I can't remember which way around it was, but I mean, Singapore and South Africa, one got independence independence in 61 and one got independence in 63. And at that point in time, the South African economy was 20 times bigger than the Singapore economy. And in 2019, the Singapore economy overtook the South African economy through trading properly. And the Singapore economy is now bigger than the South African economy, which is absolutely nonsensical. And it kind of gives some idea of what that potential is. So I think we're likely to see a much freer trade area in the Western Cape, which will both be beneficial to the existing trading partners and then through the rest of Africa too. Because I think Africa is the big opportunity and the prospect of being able to have a first world African country with first world infrastructure to be able to deliver into the African continent would be a phenomenal opportunity for both the Western Cape and the territories it's trading with.
No, absolutely. And you make a very good point there. You look at what's happened in the world since the end of the Second World War, and much of Asia was desperately poor. A lot of it was destroyed by conflict. And you see Africa was virtually untouched physically by the war, with the exception of North Africa, parts of it. But you look at countries like Singapore, you look at Malaysia, you look at Taiwan, South Korea, and even Japan, which was obliterated by the war and its actions. All massive powerhouses economically and varying different paths. Some have had state control, some have been open markets, some have been democratic, some have been autocratic. But all of them, as they became wealthier, moved towards openness, democracy, and capitalism, whatever their source was. When people look at the example of South Korea and they want to say what a great example is, but South Korea was pretty much ruled by autocratic rulers for decades until about the 1990s, and it was run by oligarchs. The chaebol were these big conglomerates, only a handful of them, kind of like South Africa, big conglomerates in retailing and mining, but they eventually moved towards a more open model, and they all had success, and all of them were desperately poor compared to places like Nigeria and Ghana and Senegal in 1960. And today, Africa is so far behind, and people can keep blaming on colonialism all they want, but Asia was colonized. All of those countries I just mentioned were colonized either by other Asians or by Western powers. So there's something to it, and there's more. So now people are competing with Super Chats to get their questions in, so I have to get this one in. So if you want to keep Super Chatting, folks, get those questions in. But Courtney McBride sent $5, and Courtney said, will the Western Cape join the Paris Climate Accord? If so, I'll be 100% on board with them. You should know that Courtney swings left of center and is in the the Naval Reserve here in the U.S. But Courtney, again, that's a question it's a hypothetical, and so I'm not sure how Phil wants to answer that. If I was president of the Western Cape, I would not enter the Paris Climate Accord. I would burn coal, refit micro-nuclear plants, and get electricity. And once everybody in the Cape had electricity and I could sell it to the rest of South Africa and the rest of Africa, then I'd look at reducing carbon emissions. But that's just my position. Phil, any thoughts?
Well, look. So as you say, we don't have a policy as an organisation, but I'm much more with Courtney than you. Then
see, there's a little space here. We're parting ways.
Look, I think the Western Cape, interestingly enough, and I don't know enough about the Paris Accord to speak on there, but I think one of the challenges with Western Cape is electricity is one of our big challenges. We don't generate enough electricity. We bring electricity in from South Africa, and in the short term we'd need to continue. But South Africa is in an utterly bizarre situation where we've literally run out of electricity. We have load shedding on a regular basis, and we've got global companies competing to offer us electricity to build power plants for free, and we're saying no. Because for purely political reasons, we don't want to sign off-take agreements. We'd rather run out of electricity and literally run out of electricity. So it's absolutely bonkers. And therefore, but in terms of natural resources, South Africa is zone 5 out of 6 zones for solar power. So we've got huge potential. We've got potential for wind onshore and offshore, and we've got a nuclear plant. Clearly, electricity itself is changing, and there's the potential for microgrids and so on and so. So I think that the Western Cape would be in a situation to develop its own infrastructure in a very modern way, because we're not having to adapt to previous infrastructure. We would have some challenges in the short term, and clearly we have to provide our electricity. But I think some balance of renewables. Personally, I think we haven't got coal, so we're not likely to use coal. We have gas now, which we've discovered. So I think probably a mixture of gas, gas, renewable energies, and nuclear would probably be the mix if I had to sort of shoot from the hip. But I'm not an expert. I think we have to save the planet, so maybe, and I'm also a little bit left of centre.
Well, if anyone infers incorrectly that I'm not in favor of protecting the planet, not that Phil did, you should disabuse yourself of that notion. But I'm also of the opinion that people shouldn't die and freeze to death and starve and deforest the countryside to create charcoal and lead to runoff and destroy our watersheds and things like that. There's many knock-on effects to the fact that people don't have access to cheap, affordable power, electricity, and energy. That's the bottom line. And so it's got to be a balance of things. We probably agree on the ultimate end result here, Phil. Courtney, you and I agree on what we want to see at the end, because I'm a conservationist. I believe in renewing the planet and putting back into it. And the so-called green energy, which isn't green, by the way, does contribute to that in a fashion. So I don't have an issue. I mean, solar photovoltaic, not a big fan of. The efficiency is still not high enough in my view, but solar thermal, solar, concentrated solar power, that's a brilliant, and especially in the Karoo, my goodness, you could do so much with that. But the point is that, yeah, that's one place where the Western Cape is short. You don't generate all the electricity that the province currently needs. And as an independent nation, you'd have to import power or quickly open up contracts and let people come in. But there are people hungry to put concentrated solar power in the Karoo, and they're being hamstrung by the monopoly that Eskom illegitimately has on the electricity sector in South Africa. So that's a whole discussion there. But now let me get to John Jarvis. He put this up a bit ago, about a half hour ago now, and it's a really good one here. And this goes back to the point that it's not entirely fair to ask Phil, because they're an advocacy group trying to push this issue. They're not a political party. But I mean, we can play, Monday morning quarterback, or we can play pontificate or Nostradamus or Senior von Rensburg here. We'll play that role, okay? And John Jarvis asked, on Independence Day, with quotation marks, the Western Cape will have no currency, no government infrastructure, no trade agreements, no central bank, no police or defense force. So what's the plan? Well, I've got a plan, but let me see if Phil wants to address that one.
Yeah. Well, look. First of all, you're going to have this long scenario between the referendum and independence. So in terms of there's not going to be an overnight scenario. And then secondly, I would look back and say, well, why do you say we're going to have none of those things? We've got a police force now. The policemen aren't all going to evaporate. It's a pretty awful police force, but it exists. So most of those systems already exist. What we're talking about is how are we going to morph those into the new systems for the new country. And clearly there has to be an awful lot of thought in terms of that. And I think that's going to involve a lot of negotiations with South Africa. But I think we also have to understand that you've got the same story of mutually assured destruction. If the Western Cape, bear in mind a couple of things. First of all, only two provinces in South Africa pay into the system. The Western Cape and Gauteng are the only provinces that pay in. So with Western Cape leaving, they're losing a source of income. And South Africa's got massive debts, and the Western Cape will be expected to take some of those debts with them. So that negotiation is going to be tough. And we mustn't be naive. We must understand that the Western Cape is going to negotiate its exit at a price. And that may well be that we say, well, look, hang on a second, all right. Well, we need to provide some buffering. Perhaps we need to provide some support to the Eastern Cape, or perhaps we need to say, well, look, you know what, we'll continue to pay our bit into the system for a generation whilst you have time to adjust, or those they're going to have to practical. So there's things that we're going to have to give to the rest of South Africa, and there's things that we're going to want. I suspect we'd be able to continue to use the rand, but I don't think we'd want to. So then, what do you do? Do we form our own currency? Do we have a currency based on the dollar, like Zimbabwe did for a while? Do we look at cryptocurrency? And I don't know. I mean, clearly these things are not in my field of expertise, and we'd have to get experts into those things to decide. They're critical questions to sort, but they aren't questions that come before, do we want to have our freedom or not? And I think that's where we start, is look, Cape Independence is about wanting to be able to elect your own government in a region of the world where you can't. Somebody else elects it for you, regardless of what you want, and that's the starting point. And if we can convince enough people to stand up and say, look, we actually do want to elect our own government rather than have South Africa choose it for us, then we're going to have to resolve these issues. And some of them are going to be challenging to resolve. But it doesn't mean that because they're challenging, we shouldn't have our freedom.
It doesn't mean because they're difficult you shouldn't ask. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Jack Kennedy, although he was more conservative than Democrat. But Jack Kennedy said we choose to go to the moon not because because it's easy, but because it's hard. That's right. You do the hard things, and that's what leaders do. And so, I saw here that Joe Donner says he nominates Phil as a benevolent dictator of a free Cape. Well, that's very kind of you, Joe. I should let you know that I've long aspired to be the benign dictator of a small African country, and frontrunners for that have always been Lesotho, Botswana, and Eswatini. But now Eswatini's become more attractive. It's always been attractive to me because then if I'm the benign dictator of Eswatini, I get the reed dance and choose a new bride every year. So I like that approach. And the second thing is that now that it's the e-commerce capital of Africa, what will be Eswatini, anyway. So I couldn't resist that one anyway. So let's see. Yeah, no, it's as far as all of this stuff, let's just look at examples. The Soviet Union broke up into 15 constituent countries. They all took the ruble with them. They all continued most of the practices they had. They had to quickly adapt and get their own passports and such. But you look at an example of Estonia. Estonia created the kroon. And the kroon was created and it was pegged to the Deutschmark, and they put hard currency reserves that they had little into banks abroad, and that was kind of a basis for their currency, and their currency was stable and it did very well. Linking it to the Deutschmark was smart, and putting hard currency against it. So, I mean, the Western Cape probably do something very similar. There are banks there, and as you said, there are policemen and military. Some are from the Cape, especially cops, but some military from there, and they're not going to simply just up and leave and go elsewhere unless they feel some special allegiance. People tend to like the Cape that live there, and if it wasn't for the crime, it would be heaven on earth in the Western Cape. Honestly, the crime is the only thing that really makes life. And to be fair, the inequality. I mean, there is a great degree of inequality, but that's the world over, so it's not unique to the Western Cape. Courtney McBride says, I heard Cape Town's beautiful. You heard correctly. He said, some say it has a unique charm like San Francisco. Yeah, it does, except, the homeless. There's fewer homeless in Cape Town these days than San Francisco. And I'm way behind the chat here. I'm trying to catch up there. Sorry. My aunt used to live in Joburg, but moved to Northern Ireland in 2018, said she would move to Western Cape when it becomes independent. That's Quotashisis. I'm not sure what that username is for, but yeah, well, along those lines, somebody here asked one of our moderators, Hendo, who's been a moderator for me for a long time. He is a refugee from the Western Cape. He lives in the UK for about 2 decades now. Will Hendo go back to the Cape if it becomes independent? I think that's a good question there. I'm trying to pull some more out here real quick, Phil, because my chat goes up and down. The software is not the best here. Alroy Ari says, whose army will we use to protect the Western Cape borders? Well, probably some of the soldiers existing now. I mean, from one day to the next, Estonia had its own military, just like that. And there were Russian soldiers there because they were deployed there. There were Estonians who were there. There are also Estonians who wanted to join. So there's a period of unwinding here. Brexit didn't happen in 5 minutes, and it's still unfolding now. And Brexit was a lot easier because it was supposed to be just an economic union, not a secession from a political body. This is a little bit different. But this isn't the first time this happened. We had the Velvet Divorce between Slovakia and the Czech Republic. That went very amicably and very successfully. They divided the debts up. They divided the resources up. They divided the military and police. Folks, it's not just like, boom, the Western Cape is independent. Oh my gosh, what happens now? A lot of things will happen before we get there. And Joe Donner says they'll create their own military. You have plenty of ex-SADF members. You have ex-SANDF members too. So anyway, I think that those things that people bring up, Phil, are really they're genuine questions. People really asking it, but they come from people that either don't understand or have a sense of history and what has happened in the past, and or have a vision for what could happen. And I think it takes leaders to explain to people how things have happened in the past, what could possibly happen, and not to get hung up on that. Everything I just discussed, none of those are reasons not to have an independent Cape. Now, none of the reasons to have an independent Cape, but there are also reasons not to have an independent Cape. Would you agree?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think they're always fair. I think people ask out of intrigue, and I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's valid questions. It just the answer is, if we can't fix that, does that mean Cape Independence is off? And it's not. We have to just start with the first part. But it's going to be an incredibly complex process, and it would also be dishonest of us to say, look, you know what? Hey, don't worry about everything. It's going to be easy. This is a journey into the unknown. But as always, it's doing nothing is a journey into the unknown. What's South Africa's military going to look like in 10 years anyway? What's the police force going to look like in 10 years? What's the currency going to look like in 10 years? South Africa is a country that's collapsing.
What's the South African National Defense Force going to look like in 3 months? 10 years. I mean, they already can't feed themselves when they go to the field. They can't respond. It's crazy. Toko said that Independent Cape means President Alan Bosak or President DeLille or President Benny Alexander. Demographics is destiny. What Tokolosi is referring to is the majority of the Cape's population is colored, mixed race, and that people would vote based on ethnicity. I would disagree with that argument. I see where, for whatever inexplicable reason, Patricia DeLille remains popular with a segment of the population in South Africa, particularly in Western Cape. But I don't think that this means automatically any of those folks would be the president. We'd have to see what would happen. For those who are unfamiliar with the demographics of Western Cape, it's about 49%. We're just talking about the Western Cape, not the Cape in total. Western Cape is about 49% colored, about 17% white or European, if you want to use that terminology, which is about double the rest of the country these days. And then the rest is Black African. And so it is an interesting mix. It's different than a lot of the country. You have a larger percentage of colored, much larger, and a larger percentage of whites than you find in other parts of the country. But I really don't think that we're predestined to have any particular person based on ethnicity to become president of an independent Cape Republic.
And I want to back that up with a statistic, and I'm going to go that are we not destined? That actually there's ample proof that that's not the destiny of the Western Cape, and that is very interesting. Is that since 1994, the political dominance actually belongs in the hands of the so-called coloured people in the Western Cape, and since 1994, the Western Cape has elected a black premier, a coloured or brown premier, a white premier, a male premier, a female premier, a Christian premier, and a Muslim premier. and South Africa has elected black men.
Exactly.
The Western Cape has shown, and particularly the coloured people, and hats off to them, have shown that they will elect the best person for the job, as opposed to the personal thing. And as we sit here as we speak, they've elected the DA again. They've elected a white mayor in Cape Town. They've elected a white premier in the Western Cape. It certainly isn't the case. So we don't know what the future holds, but what we do know is if past performance is a guide for future performance, then it's something we don't have to worry about. Our fate is far worse in South Africa with people voting along racial lines than in the Western Cape.
Yeah, I would have to argue that the Western Cape is far more cosmopolitan in the context than anywhere in South Africa. It truly is. And if you've ever been to Cape Town, if you're not from there, if you visited, you'll get that sense when you're there. It's really a different sort of place. And I'm not trying to talk up the Western Cape. I'm just being honest. I mean, I've been there many times. Now, Quotacious says that, can we start calling Western Cape something like the Cape Republic rather than the Western Cape? Well, at the moment you can't, because it's a province in South Africa. It's the Western Cape province. But if your sentiment is, can we call it Cape Republic? I do think that that's where Phil and his group are headed. I mean, they aren't called the Western Cape Independence Advocacy Group. They're called the Cape Independent Advocacy Group, and they have a really cool flag, one of my favorite flags out there. So, Phil, I think that Quotacious has hit the mark, and I think I've explained it well. Have I got it wrong?
Yeah, have a look. Our working title is the Cape of Good Hope. We'd love it to be called the Cape of Good Hope. I think it has a historical connection, and obviously the concept of hope is so central to what we're trying to do that there's a certain symbolism to it. So that's our working title. But yes, and actually sometimes we probably should refer to it more often as by its working title. But there you go. Yeah, we sort of get drawn back into sort of present realities.
All right, Phil. Courtney's back here with another comment I'm going to bring in because it's more to the left. I like to try to be balanced here. Courtney says, with regards to human rights, how will the Cape Republic deal with issues like marriage equality and LGBTQ rights? Before you answer, there's no such thing as marriage equality. Marriage is an institution created by religious organizations, recognized and sanctioned by the state. Now, in most localities, you must be married twice oftentimes. You're married by a civil authority and you're married by church. Some civil authorities accept the church wedding, but there's no such thing as marriage equality. A goat can't marry a human being. You can't marry your child. There's no such thing as marriage equality. So that's, I'm making that unequivocally. Phil may take a different approach on this, but I'm putting that out there before Phil gets, it's my show, so I get a chance to put that out there. And LGBTQ rights, my goodness. I mean, Gay Town is like the epicenter of gay South Africa. I mean, if you've ever been to Cape Town, I don't imagine that it would be something that would be denied, or probably a lot of people in favor of LGBTQ LGBTQ rights, and what Courtney is terming marriage equality, or what I would say is civil unions for anyone who's an adult and able to consummate such a union. Phil, thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, again, it's not our decision to make, but I think South Africa has, as much as any other country, understands the terrible consequences of discrimination or arbitrary discrimination. South Africa has experienced that. The Western Cape has experienced that too, and we're fighting for a society where people have genuine freedom. So I think our default position on most things would not to be prescriptive, unless there was a reason to be. And again, I can't speak for what's going to be decided, but I would be absolutely amazed if we weren't an extremely tolerant and liberal society. And the Cape has a long history. We're going back 150 years of Cape liberalism. Where with a real respect. And as I say, we talked about this Schreiner Commission. Before South Africa was formed, the Western Cape had this non-racial franchise, and fought hard to try and keep a non-racial franchise. Interesting enough, you were allowed to vote in the Cape if you owned property, regardless of your colour. It was a status-based thing. I would be amazed if we did anything other than that. And as you say. But I can't make that decision for us.
No, of course not. And that's, again, this is a hypothetical, so you can't hold Phil or I to this. We're just answering your questions as best as possible, looking at the history and traditions of what's happened in the Western Cape. It's been a very tolerant place. It's been a place in which people have been accepted for a very long time. So I would be surprised if people did anything against it. Now, I've got to get a programming alert here. We can call off the search party. Our Hungarian/South African/Canadian, Tony Nage, is back. I was worried the Rona got him there for a while. I haven't seen Tony in a while. And also somebody who came in like a tsunami with excitement for the channel and joined the channel as a member. We're very grateful for that. Mandy Dumoy, Lulu Innovations, is back. I haven't seen her chat in a while. So, Mandy, it's good to see you again. Always a pleasure to have you there. So let's see who else we got here. Any other questions we want to bring up here very quickly? Oh, Alvaron is saying that Cosatu is useless. Yes, they are. So is the South African Communist Party and the Angry Naughty Children, but that's a whole other story. Let's see. Don't like it to the RAND. Don't link it to the RAND, I think is what I meant to say. Don't be like Namibia or Lesotho that depend on South Africa's performance. Well, quotations in the early stages of an organization going off. Roger, got you. So in the early stages of South Africa, I get distracted there, of countries. I've got that now. It's your message just shown up there on the screen there, Phil. So I've got to.
Sorry, Chris. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It won't. I'm trying to get it to go away. It won't go away until I address it. So Phil sent me a note telling me he's got a hard stop, which I was about to get to anyway, because I mean it's a lot to ask for my stay more than 90 minutes. But even if they do talk like a machine gun.
I would normally stay. Fortunately, I've got at 8 o'clock, and I need to log on at quarter to 8.
It's not a problem. I've got to finish wrapping up my video on Ramaphosa being chased out of the Royal Bafokeng Stadium, and then I've got to prep for an evening show. But anyway, linking it to a currency would be a necessity. It's a matter of practicality, and it would likely be there. And in fact, I would suspect that if tomorrow, let's say tomorrow, there was a referendum, and then the ANC said, "Fine, you're on your own." And on May 30th, it was an independent Cape. Well, it's going to have the rand. I mean, there's no way you're going to have a currency between now and then. You can't even contract with currency manufacturers in Europe to produce a currency, and you have nothing to back it. So there is likely I'd just be linked to the rand, at least briefly, and then maybe linked to the dollar or the euro or something like that afterwards. But don't get hung up on that, folks. That's the fad. That's the fad. That's the fear, the apathy, and the disbelief that it can happen. It can happen, whether you like it or not. It can happen. It can happen very quickly there. So Phil, with that in mind, I want to thank you for coming on. And this is driving me nuts here. Let me get you back on the screen, see if I can't get rid of this text message, because it's really driving me nuts. Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's not your fault. Okay, now it's gone. Okay, now the way Zoom works, it won't go away from the menu at the bottom. People can see it, and so it's like, what are they talking about? So anyway, you're back on the screen now. But Phil, let me go ahead and just say thanks again. It's a great pleasure talking to you again. I think this is your 4th appearance on the program over the last 2 years, and I really appreciate your time, and also your focus on what you're doing. You're not emotional about it. You're not hyperbolic about it. You're not making wild, outlandish claims. You're respectful of other people. And that sometimes gets caught up in the conversation when people want to oppose or want to advocate for or against this sort of thing. So thank you very much for that. Also, thank you for bringing us up to speed on where we're at on the march, because the media didn't cover it. And what I want to do is give you a chance to get a last word in here and share anything you might want to say about where Cape Secession is. Is it coming, and the focus? And I will say this. You said ask us next month where we're at because you're meeting with the DA. Well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to invite you back on next month and see what happened, and then maybe we can update people on that. And now, if Phil's not available, if his tail's between his legs, then we'll know it didn't go well. But anyway, Phil, your chance to wrap up here, so we can get you out of here.
Yeah, no, look, it's been great to be on. I think we've covered an awful lot of ground, so there's not too much to say. I think, look, from our point of view, the march was important just to refocus people on Cape Independence. It's the first event we've had since the local government elections, but our focus now is on a few things, and the referendum legislation is one of them. We also are in the process of establishing with a number of political parties an autonomy working group, so there's a few projects that we are busy with, which will all feed into the sort of the greater mix. Look, I'll update you when we come back. There's not really much I can say publicly on those at the moment, except to say there's some really quite exciting projects going on in the background, if they come to fruition, they will move things along quite significantly.
Well, excellent. That's a fantastic way to wrap it up. Folks, Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Once again, good to see you again, Phil. Thanks a lot. I'll let you drop off and make it to your other appointment, and thank you for your time. You're very generous with it. And have a lovely weekend, but it's Sunday night, so have a lovely week ahead, and we'll chat again.
Cheers, Chris. Bye.
Right. Folks, Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Is he going to give him a chance to drop off there?
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Okay, he found his way out. All right, folks, thanks a lot. Back to John Jarvis's point. John says one of the biggest reasons why Scotland's referendum failed was the fact the question how it will work was never answered. Fair point, John. I disagree. That's the reason why Scotland's referendum failed multiple times, by the way. That's never gone through. This movement to get independent Scotland has never gone through. It has a lot more to do with suckling off the teat of London and where that money was going to come from. I suspect is the reason. I could be wrong in my assessment there. What I will say is that what I mean by my point is that you don't dismiss those concerns, but I mean, no one's empowered unless there's a body that's actively working to become the organization that creates a constitution, that creates the organization for the Western Cape. These are not difficult things to accomplish. In fact, it should already be done. If I lived in the Western Cape and I was in a position advocating for this, I would already be getting databases of people who serve in uniform now in the police and the military. I'd also find veterans who are still fit and capable, or at least those who are older and half broken who have leadership capability. And I would begin making plans for that. I'd also begin making plans for economic agreements and for a passport issuance, and contacting passport manufacturers and currency manufacturers. And yeah, all this will be taking place. But I'm not in the Western Cape, and I'm not a citizen of South Africa or the Western Cape or the Cape Independent Republic or Cape of Good Hope, whatever we're going to call it. But the point is that, your point is well taken, John. What you have to do is you move forward. Once you have a referendum that says, okay, we want independence, and the people, right now, if here's the thing, and let me explain this, John. So now, if Phil or Des Palm or High Marks or someone came forward and said, okay, here's the plan. We're going to have a police force of 10,000. We're going to have 40,000 in our defense force. They're going to come from existing places. We're going to take over the Simonstown Naval Base. We're going to ask the South African government to relocate its broken submarines and its broken cruisers to Richards Bay or to Port Elizabeth or Durban, where they can sit in sewage, something like that. You can say all those things, but they're just going to be ridiculed by the press. And nobody's going to pay any attention because it's just pie in the sky. So I suspect there are some people that have these plans in motion. They're working towards this right now. I don't have answers who they are, who they might be, but I wouldn't lose a lot of sleep over it. And I think the bigger issue here is to garner enough support for the referendum and for people to vote for it and then move forward legally. But the path legally is going to take time. The United Nations adheres to the principle of self-determination. They don't actually adhere to the practical application of it, but they adhere to the principle of self-determination for peoples. That's a stated goal of the United Nations. It's a stated core function of the United Nations. They don't often follow that, but they do state that. So there's lots of ground to cover here. But the point is that, John Jarvis, your point's well taken about if you leave people in the dark, they're going to have those things. They're going to have that problem. They're going to have FAD. They're going to have fear. They're going to have fear about what's law enforcement going to be. Can we defend our borders? Are we going to overrun? They're going to have apathy because nothing's happening. And they're going to have disbelief. It can never happen. Well, if you come up with a major plan right now, if I came up with a plan right now, given the government of South Africa, and I live in South Africa, the ANC would probably accuse me of insurrection and arrest me and take my resources for planning to plot to overthrow the government of South Africa by taking the country separate. So you just got to be really careful about this stuff. There's a lot going on here, but thank you so much. Those who've become subscribers in the stream, only one new subscriber showed up, but I can tell you that about a dozen people signed up. Thank you to a dozen people signed up, and thank you all. So I will be back for Night Owls in 2 hours, folks. We'll do a Night Owls. But look, in the meantime, hopefully you get the announcement. If you don't get the announcement from YouTube, which most people aren't getting because YouTube hides my prepared videos, look in the Telegram announcements group, which is free of charge. If Hendo or Ahmad could put up the Telegram announcements group, give you a chance to go sign up for it. No one can contribute to that group except me. You won't get any crypto harassment. You'll find out about all my published videos and my live streams upcoming. So either there, or if you're a paying member and you're in the WhatsApp members group, then you can get it there. So I put it in both places. But thanks a lot, folks. I'll be back in 2 hours for Night Owls, and I'll be doing the news because we can get a chance to news this time. So we'll be doing the news at 9:30 South Africa time and Europe time these days, so in Western Europe, and that's 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. We'll be back with Night Owls and the news on Sunday. And I don't have to rush off to the War College tomorrow. My consulting is done, so I've got flexibility tonight. All I need to do is cut some grass before the rain hits. Anyway, folks, thank you all so much. I appreciate your time and support. And be sure to smash that like button. Doesn't cost you anything. We approached about 100 viewers in the stream, so thank you all so much for that. Have a lovely day, and be safe out there wherever you find yourself. And don't forget, this is the African National Congress. We've rebranded them. Reign. Race hustling, arrogance, ineptitude, and negligence. Reign. There you go. There you go. Thanks a lot, everybody. Appreciate it. And we'll see you here on Chris Wyatt Africa in about 2 hours to the minute. Cheers. Be safe out there. $99 likes. Can we do a little better than that? Can we do a little better than that? I'm just saying. 99 likes? Come on, man. Come on, man. Like Joe Biden here. 99 likes. We can't do better than... Oh, there it is. 100. Bye-bye, Naki. Cheers, everybody. Take care of yourselves.